Hello, AP Music Theory. We are going to take notes today on non-chord tones, also known as non-harmonic tones. They are the same thing, and I abbreviate them NCTs. So a non-chord tone is exactly what it says. It's a note that doesn't fit in the chord, and therefore you can't analyze it using traditional chord analysis that we have been doing. So we have to be able to give it another name. This isn't like, oh, well, that note doesn't fit in the chord. I guess I can't do anything with it. You have to be able to account for every single note that you see. So we're going to talk about the different types of non-chord tones today and make a happy little chart to help solidify them into your brain. So if you want to go ahead and pause the recording for a second to create this chart, and then I'll actually slide it up and you can create, like, put all of them in there. So again, you're going to need 5 columns, abbreviate, or the abbreviation, the name, approach, resolve, and a picture, or pick. Okay, so I've got essentially 8 on here, but one is kind of related to the other, so I'm going to call that 2A. Number 1, PT, 2, NT, 2A, NG, also known as CT, which we'll get there. 3 is sus. 4 RET, 5 app, 6 ET, and 7 PED. Okay, so pause if you need to get your chart set up, and then we will get going. All right, here we go. PT is also known as a passing tone. Passing tones are approached by step and resolved by a step in the opposite, or in the same direction. Excuse me. Same direction. So what does that mean? All right, so you've got this. This is your passing tone. This is what we would label. You would circle it just like this in your notation. And you could write like PT right next to your circle. You can see that it's approached by step and resolved by step right after it. If you would like to do it on staff paper so that you can see, a passing tone is in fact one step away. Each one of them is a second, okay? And they can go either direction. And again, to do it in notation, you circle where it is, and then you write PT next to it. These are like scales, folks. Scales. Go team. All right, so that's passing tone. Anything else you want to write down in your list? If you want to write like scale over here, that could be very beneficial and helpful. All right, next one, a neighbor tone. Neighbor tones are very similar to passing tones, but instead of continuing up in the direction of a scale, you're going to go right back home where you came from. Okay, so it's also approached by step. It's resolved by step, but this one is in the opposite direction. These two are the same. So you're going up and back down to the same note, or down and back to the same note, okay? You can have the upper neighbor or the lower neighbor. There are elements of the textbook and various things that are going to make you define upper neighbor and lower neighbor. A lot of times you'll see like upper neighbor or lower neighbor. I don't care that much. It's just a neighbor tone, NT. As long as you know that it's a neighbor, you are good. You go to your neighbor's house and you come back to your house. You do not live at your neighbor's house after you get there. No, you come back to your house. You go home after you go to the neighbor's, wearing a mask with 6 feet of distance. Okay. All right, the next one is called a neighbor group. Now, a lot of music theory online things or textbooks are going to call these changing tones. I really like neighbor group because it tells you what it is. We are going to see neighbor tones and passing tones so often. I mean, they are like the Mario coins of music theory non-chord tones. They are everywhere. Neighbor groups, by calling it a neighbor group, you're going to remember that it's related to a neighbor tone, and then you'll be able to spot it when it comes up. This is not as common, but again, the other changing tones. is also what it's called. Again, that's not that you need to know this term, but if you happen to see it, you can know that it is the same as a neighbor group. Okay, so this is just like a neighbor tone. It's approached by step and resolved by step in the opposite direction. But really the difference is that it's both non-chord, or not non-chord tones, both neighbor tones. So you're gonna have the note you start with, this is your home base note. You're gonna have your upper neighbor, then immediately followed by the lower neighbor, and then back to the home base note, okay? So those are the same. These together are the neighbor group, okay? So if you can hear me on the piano, if I'm on C, if I play C, and I play the upper neighbor, if I play the lower neighbor, if I play the neighbor group, I can do it the other way too. So it's the note directly below the chord tone, the note directly above the chord tone, and then back. You do not put the home base note in the middle of the neighbor group. It's just upper neighbor, lower neighbor, and then back, or in reverse, lower neighbor, upper neighbor, and then back to the home base note. And again, the home base note, all of these notes that are not circled, those are chord tones. Those are notes that would fit in your triad. If you've got a C major triad, these are C, E, and G. This note is the note that doesn't fit. This is like F, or A, or B, or a note that is not C, E, G, and part of your Roman numeral. Okie doke. The next one is suspension, okay? Abbreviated sus. This is actually probably the most common one to also encounter in pop music. But this is a suspension. And this is approached by the same note and resolved by step down. Notice that I'm very specific in my steps. So if it just says step, it could be any direction. But if it says step in the same direction, that means you got to keep going in the same way. Step in the opposite direction, you got to change directions. But this one, it doesn't say that it's an opposite direction. No, it's a step down. It has to go down. So if it's approached by the same note, here's your chord tone. Now the chord has changed. This is now a non-chord tone before resolving down to another thing. So it's like the chords are here. Here is one Roman numeral chord. Here is another Roman numeral chord. This one is hung on to or suspended. It didn't really get the memo. The chord changed. It's a little late to the party. And then it changes a little bit late. Okay? So that's your picture for that one. Now I'm going to put a little star here. And note that there is more to come with suspensions. Not only are we going to identify that this is what type of non-chord tone this is, but a suspension also has numbers that go along with it. And I will show you that in a little bit. But for right now, this is all you need to know with the suspension. Approached by the same pitch and resolved by step down. Okay, the next one is a retardation. Not to be confused with a ritardando, we are not slowing down. But a retardation, I put it right next to a suspension because it is, in my head, linked to a suspension because it's the same idea the other way. So this one is also approached by the same note, but it is resolved by a step up. So you get the same kind of idea with these chords. So I'm just gonna like draw it right next to it. So here's one chord. And then here's the other. It's approached by the same note, and then it's resolved by step up. Okay, so this is one chord. So both of these, the chords change right at the place where I have a non-chord tone. So that note is hanging over. Oftentimes you will actually see a tie. So you can like rhythmically, visually see the note being hung onto. Not always, but sometimes you do get that. And then this one is just resolved by step up. I will tell you right now that suspension is about 10 times more common than a retardation. These are rare to find. These are everywhere. Okay? Kind of ditto up here. Everywhere. Everywhere. Not too common. Everywhere. Not too common. Okay? I will say that linking these in your brain will help you kind of memorize them in terms of what they do and how they act and go through some of this. Okay. My suggestion right now is to pause the video, go back and just read through, even reading out loud, some of the things that you see here to try to get some of the terms and definitions in your brain. Feel free to pause. I'm gonna keep going. All right, so I'm gonna move up. And now we've got the last couple. Okay, so this one, it's one of my favorite music theory words. It's so wonderful. This is not like there's an app for that. No, none of that. This is an appoggiatura. Oh, I love it so much. Double your P and double your G for all of your Italian awesome word fun. Appoggiatura. Appoggiatura. It's great. Okay, appoggiaturas are wonderful little bits to add to music to make it sound fancy, and they're everywhere. They're all over. And when you start to kind of listen to other classical pieces, you can find them in a lot of places. And they're just so lovely. And honestly, most of the time I find them to be very elegant non-chord tones. So appoggiaturas are approached by leap. So first one we found so far that's approached by a leap. Now a leap is anything bigger than a step. So if a step is a second, this is a third or larger. Okay? So it's approached by leap, and then it's approached by step in the opposite direction. Okay? So that does mean you can go either direction with your leap, so as long as you go in the next direction. Now, most of the time, you are going to see leap up, step down. You notice that my picture made this like way farther apart. Let me move my sheet over just a smidger. Okay, so this is your non-chord tone. It's approached by a leap up and then resolved by a step down. Okay, it doesn't really matter where the chord change is here. It's not part of either one of these chords. However, it could be start here, leap down, step up. Okay, so it can be either way. Giant leap, or just a leap of a third. It could be the leap of an octave. It could be a third. Anything that's bigger than a third constitutes a leap. So it could be either one of those. All right. The next one, E.T., not phone home. This is an escape tone. And this is the backwards or opposite of an appoggiatura. Okay? So this is approached by step and resolved by leap in the opposite direction. Okay, so this is step up, leap down, step down, leap up. Okay, so you're close, and then you leap. Step, leap, or step down, leap up. Okay? Like before, link them together so that you remember that escape tone and appoggiatura are linked. I will say that a lot of times people forget which one is which one does which first. Not that it's the greatest analogy in the world, but you know, it kind of works. And I like to use the analogy of like skydiving. So if you're going to skydive, you're going to kind of like escape out of the plane. So you have to step up onto the little ledge and then leap out. So to escape the plane, you are going to step up and leap down. So if you can remember that's how escape tone works. You are escaping the plane. And you remember that appoggiatura is linked, but just backwards. Like, well, if escape tone is step, then leap, well, then an appoggiatura must be leap, then step. So hopefully that's a handy way for you to remember that one. All right, the last one is known as a pedal point. Okay? All right. A pedal point is kind of one of those strange ones, and this is honestly pretty rare to find. I'll also tell you where you're going to find it. This one has kind of a funny thing on this chart, is that it's approached by the same note and resolved by the same note. It's like, well, how can that be? A pedal point often found in the bass, not always, but often, is when it's like somebody, again, doesn't get the memo that the chords are changing above you, but this lower note just keeps on hanging around. You often will hear this as like the dominant note or scale degree 5, just like being pumped out in the bass while a whole bunch of other stuff happens to create tension in music so as to like finally get you to the tonic eventually. So this is something that you're going to see down here in the bottom while it's part of the chord here. This chord changes, goes back, and this is no longer part of that chord, but you can see that it was the bass note in these two chords, and it just is like hanging around. Sometimes you'll even just see it flat out written as a dotted half note that just keeps on going. Okay, so a pedal point, something in the bass, approached by the same note, resolved by the same note. It's like, but this note doesn't go in that chord at all. How do I get this note and that note to be a part of the same chord? Oh, it's approached by same, resolved by same. I'm just going to say that this is the chord that's going to give me whatever Roman numeral I need, and that this note is a pedal point that's just hanging around from the other two chords. Okay, before I finish this non-chord tone video, I want to go back just briefly to suspensions. Now, this isn't going to be the whole description of suspensions, but it's at least going to be a little bit. I'll just put back up this here so that you can check your notes, pause and check. Pause and check. Okay, so now we're going to look at suspensions for a minute. And I've written actually, here, I'll do two things first. Okay, first, we're going to check out a passing tone and like how this is going to look. Now, this is an example that I'm going to use in the next video, but just for the purpose of this right now, if you were trying to do a Roman numeral analysis of this excerpt up at the top, and I gave you 1, 2, and 3, so you have to come up with a chord on beat 1, a chord on beat 2, and a chord that is beat 3 and beat 4. Well, here you have C, D, E, and G. You have to account for every note when you're doing Roman numeral analysis, and now that we add non-chord tones into the mix. So if I have C, D, E, G, and I'm in the key of C, well, it's like, that looks like C, E, G with this extra D hanging around. Okay, well, that's probably right. So what you do is you circle this one and say, that's not part of the chord. By circling it, that's what you're telling me. It's not part of the chord. So then C, E, G is a tonic chord. That makes sense. That's a 1 chord. And then D, it's approached by step and resolved by step. It's going in a scale, so that is a passing tone. And that's exactly how I do it. Give me the Roman numeral analysis. Tell me what note is not in the chord. What note are you pulling out because it doesn't fit? And then give it a label. If you can't give it a label, if you look at your like cheat sheet of non-chord tones and it doesn't fit any of them, go back, try again. That might actually be a chord tone. Okay? Now, not to say that they're always on the end of a beat. Sometimes they could be on the downbeat. But I would say that if you have a bunch of these that don't seem to fit, like this one only lasts for half of the beat that I'm trying to figure this out. Circling something that exists for the whole beat is likely also not going to be your non-chord tone as well. If it exists the whole time, it's probably important enough to be a chord tone. Okay? You would do the same thing over here. I have F down in the bass, A, C, F, A, E, G, D, F. So D, F, A, C, D, F, A, C. I think you could make an argument for all of those. So I could say that this was F, A, C, but then I end up with kind of a lot of non-chord tones here. But let's just say we're going to make it F, A, C, and we're going to call it a 4 chord. Okay? Well, then F, A, and C are all non-chord tones. E and G are not, and neither is D. So I could call E a passing tone, and I could call G a passing tone. I could call D then a neighbor tone. So this is a neighbor tone, and these are both passing tones. Now, I could also analyze this a different way. I could look at this as that D is a chord tone. Now, it's kind of a short chord tone that happens on the end of beat 4, but I could make an argument that this is actually D, F, A, C. That this is actually a 2 chord in first inversion. So it'll be half diminished, 6, 5. So D is now a chord tone, and only these two are the passing tones. Both of those are correct analyses. Okay? As long as I account for every note, if I account for that D and tell me that it's a chord tone, I better have a 2 chord. If I circle it and say that it's a non-chord tone, I better label it a neighbor tone and then call it a 4 chord. Both of them are accurate. There may be answers that are better than others, but both of them are accurate so long as you account for every note. Okay. Lastly, suspensions. Okay, let's see what these look like. Let's play the normal one first. And again, this is just like a plagal cadence, 4/1, at the end of a tune, and how we would expect to hear it. But if I have a suspension in the top voice, as I do right there, where the F didn't get the memo and just hangs around a little longer, you can see that. One more time. So you hear that resolution down and that note that's just kind of like, hello, hello, get going, go down there, that it really wants to resolve downward, okay? So this is how it would get marked. But another thing about this is that we're going to be really specific about how we label suspensions. So this suspension is going to be labeled as such. This is the note that we circle. The F is the note that doesn't fit. C, E, G is the chord. F is the note that's left out and doesn't fit. So we're going to label it suspension, or, broke my eraser. I'm going to label it sus. Then we are going to compare the interval of each of the suspension pitches to the chord tone. Now, we're not going to worry about this one anymore. This is just the approach, same step down. So using this one down here, from the C up to an F without adding the additional octave, C to F is a 4th. I'm going to mark that down. And then C to E is a 3rd. So this is known as a 4/3 suspension. Okay? And again, I don't do that from the note that it's right next to. I do it to the bass. So the only time, so if the suspension was in the tenor, you compare it to the bass. If it was in the alto, you compare it to the bass. Soprano, compare it to the bass. You always compare it to the lowest note down. Now, if the suspension happens to be in the bass, which it can be, you're going to compare it to the tenor, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Not quite yet. I feel like this video has been a little long for now. But I did want to at least introduce you to how we are going to label these by numbers and give you a couple of common ones that you might see. So 4/3 is common. 7/6 is common. 9/8 is common, which is also similar to 2/1. I'll explain why those are similar as well. And then the elusive bass suspension, which is 2/3. And again, I'll give you another example of that later as we get in, but I think I might cloud your brain if I give you all of that at once. Okay, that is your non-chord tone lesson. Happy figuring all of that fun out, and we're going to put all of that into practice later this week. Thanks all.